Consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19. This is a Zoom meeting. Please note that the meeting is being recorded, that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by your recording. All supporting materials that have been provided, members of this body, are available at the town's website unless otherwise noted. Those are kind of the highlights there. So we're in order. Malcolm?
Malcolm, you're muted.
Now, the Board of Health meeting is now officially open. Steve Esco is off island. I will be chair today. For all the introductory comments about the requirements of online meetings, I defer to what has just been spoken by the acting chair of the Select Board. They all apply to the Board of Health as well. And if you would enter, we do have a staff member, Roberto Santamaria is here. And when I call out your name from the Board of Health, please state that you're here. As I see Jim Cooper.
Here.
Melissa Murphy.
Here.
And that's the three of us, so we do have a quorum.
I'm here as well.
Oh, I didn't see you. Anyways, okay. So Meredith Lepre is here as well, so welcome again.
Matthew has joined us as well too. Hi, Matt.
Hi.
So the first item on the agenda is, now we've done all the announcements, is this public comment on any issue that it's not on the agenda. Any comments? No? So next is a COVID update. Roberto?
Okay, so a lot has transpired in the last hour. The governor just issued new orders regarding restaurants and enforcement. So one of the things that we are asked, that was brought up, I'm going to read them right off right here, is that restaurants have been brought from 100 down to 50. So now all those gatherings need to be brought down. The alcohol order, if you remember, you used to be able to take alcohol off premise. The governor just ordered a few minutes ago, all alcohol to go is no longer okay, and it has to be consumed on premises with a food order. So you can't just go in and order oyster crackers or something. It has to be done with food. Amy, I can see your reaction. And then I know Chief Pittman is on here too, so I would ask to see if he wants to comment on this. There's an order. He is asking that police can enforce as well. So we don't have a lot of guidance from any of these three yet. He just announced it 30 minutes ago. But so we're going to be waiting for more further guidance on that. But I just wanted to make sure that that information is out. NCTV, if you're able, can you upgrade Chief Pittman as from an attendee to panelist so that he can participate in this discussion as well? Oh, Libby.
While that's happening, Chief and I were just talking on the phone. I just came in about a few minutes into the press conference and I didn't see the whole entire thing, and I'm trying to desperately look through the state website to see if anything's up there yet. I looked at a quick blurb from the Boston Globe about what was happening, and it's as Roberto was just outlining and more, and we have not had a chance to sort through it all yet. But what the chief and I were just talking about is, there's obviously this growing issue with lines and crowds, particularly possibly in the lower Broad Street area. And we're desperately trying to figure out how to deal with those things. We had our discussion the other night about one of the establishments' line, which is going into the street, and they need help with it. And there's only so much help we can provide that the business has to work with us on. Obviously, we all know that. So one of the things we were going to do is put up barriers on South Beach, eliminate some parking there so their line could go down that way and stop being in the street. And that is a little problematic with the Jersey barriers and the deliveries, and Amy can speak more to that. I think we need to do our best to try to figure that out. Chief can talk about this, but we're gonna try to get some more police presence down there. I think we need some direction from the board as to when you want that, and so you need to understand what the impacts of that are going to be. We're gonna have to pull people off of other things. Greg Corbo, you probably have not even had a chance to watch or absorb anything the governor just said, but one of the issues was reducing the gatherings to 50. And so what we're wondering, and he said something about all gatherings, public or private property. So I'm trying to find out, does that mean a line? I don't think it does, because I don't think that's really so much of a gathering as it is people in a line. But that's a bit of a question. So this is like evolving as we're talking. It's just hard to sort it through as we're having this meeting. But I think at your meetings last week, there was some talk about should we were going to try to see what we could do about the lower Broad Street area. And if it was seemingly not working out well, we were going to order their closure, I think at midnight. And I think we're thinking it may be time for that, especially with this announcement coming from the governor. But I would look to maybe Roberto and Amy for a little bit more on that, and Chief, and what you all are hearing and seeing. I know that Matt has had a lot of discussion with at least a couple of those businesses, and they need help. And we want to help, but just people need to understand helping is going to take away from other areas, and we're trying to minimize what that impact is going to have. But we think there's a little bit of stuff we can do right now. Greg, sorry, I don't mean to take over.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to the town manager. I haven't seen the order yet. I do, however, have a press release, and it does say that phase 3 of the state's reopening plan will be put on hold, and the outdoor gathering limit will decrease from 100 to 50 effective Tuesday. So that, I think, buys you a little bit of wiggle room for this weekend. But certainly, I do think there's going to be a sense of urgency to, figuring out how this applies to various different organizations that are operating within the town. My understanding under previous versions of the order were that a gathering was something that was put together by an entity, not just a more random group of people, standing in line or something like that. But while we're on the call here, I'll try to see if I can actually dig up the order. And if I can't do it now, I will certainly get that to you as soon as possible.
Great, thank you. Matt.
Yeah, I'm not sure that you need this is in the details, but just a quick thought. I'm not sure you need Jersey barriers down the side street on Broad. I think a couple sawhorses there from 5 at night till 10 at night. Some period might be able, because you still need to access Young's, you still need to access the apartments in the back, which they can still do from the back side. But that's sort of the details.
If I may just follow up on that, that's what we're doing. We don't have those crowd control barriers. We get them from the valet, thankfully, at this point in time, and are trying to get those delivered. There are stanchions up in that area, but yes, Jersey barriers, I determined, were not really something we could really do in that area because of that reason. So we're trying to get those down there as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. Roberto, do you want to go on with your update?
It's been kind of usurped by this news a little bit. We were doing great. We had 6 days of no new cases to today. So we are up to 43. Contact tracing is happening. We were able to get in contact really quickly with one of them. He's already isolating. That was actually caught through our travel order and asymptomatic testing. So that's really good. That's really important. Our surveillance system is working. And then we're working on contact tracing on the second person right now. So that's really good. And then I think that's just where we lie. One of the things that the governor did mention today is that he is going to be releasing, or the Department of Public Health is going to be releasing a community level report every week. So now, as far as some of the information that people have been looking for, the things that we're not allowed to release, but the State Department of Public Health is. They're going to be putting that in that weekly report. I don't know when that weekly report is going to start. He just teased it, so it could be Tuesday, it could be Wednesday, it could be Tuesday or Wednesday the 18th. So that's just what we're waiting for. And that's it. And I know Melissa and Jason both had some.
Thank you. Any questions for Roberto?
Melissa had her hand up. Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I have, I guess, one comment and then maybe a couple of questions through you, Malcolm, to perhaps Greg Corbo. But the comment is that as of today, Rhode Island is now added to a state added to the travel restriction, which I think is really important for the public to be aware of. Regarding the restaurants, no alcohol to go and alcohol only with food, does that start immediately or does that start on Tuesday also?
I have no idea.
Tuesday. It's Tuesday. They link to the order. It's effective August 11th. The order is up now. If you click through on that press release, the order for that, and they thankfully, one thing I'll say is, I think what they're trying to do is to prevent those restaurants or bars masquerading as restaurants, and have finally given us a definition that food does not mean potato chips, pretzels, or other prepackaged or manufactured foods. So they've given us finally a bit of a definition. So if you look, that kind of is up there right now.
And through you, Mr. Chair, just to add to that, I would point out that last week, the Board of Health, when it issued its order with respect to restaurants in Nantucket, part of that order was specifically to limit the service of alcohol to diners who are seated and eating food. So that, notwithstanding the governor's order, that limitation is currently in effect in Nantucket.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Any other comments, or we'll go on to next item says enforcement update? I'm sorry. I can't see everybody. Go ahead.
I think that the order that we did last week does not, it just says that they have to have food. So my husband does work in the restaurant industry, and people were just having oyster crackers, going in and having a drink and getting a package of oyster crackers thrown at them. So I think that it's probably good that the new state order says that that is not allowed.
So if I can just jump in real quick here, and I'm going to share the screen real fast. The order that you'll see here that I have highlighted explicitly says potato chips, pretzels, and other prepackaged or manufactured foods do not constitute food prepared on site. For each customer, an item of prepared food must be ordered at the same time as an initial alcoholic beverage order. So it is, he updated it and he explicitly put it out there. It says effective August 11th. So as of Tuesday. So I just wanted to quickly clarify that. And the link to that is in the press release that I just forwarded to everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
I don't see any other hands.
Greg Corbo.
Back to enforcement.
Greg Corbo has a question.
Mr. Chair, if I could just quickly, with respect to what Roberto pointed out and what was observed regarding the town's order, my opinion would be that for purposes of enforcement, if the town's order says that alcohol can only be served with food, the definition of food can be made with reference to the governor's order, even if statewide those requirements do not take place until Tuesday. But for purposes of enforcement of the Nantucket order, I would suggest using that definition going forward immediately.
Do we need to make a specific motion for that, or is it in?
I would say yes, just to
I would say so. So,
Christy.
Christy, yes.
Yes, thank you. I know everybody's trying to adapt, and having something go into effect immediately doesn't give restaurants a lot of time on a Friday afternoon to put, something on their menu. I'm just wondering if we could do a 24 or 48 hour lead time on this.
I think, can I comment on that? Obviously, this part of it does not take effect until August the 11th. The one thing I'll say about this is that technically all of these are common viculars. With that license requires some sort of food. It's some sort of, and I've talked to all of them, light bites or some sort of menu. So that should be something they have available at all times as part of their license. There's just, when there's a bar service, you can go and have a drink. And so that's why we kind of highlighted it to say that that's technically part of your license requirements, to have some sort of, it can be an appetizer or two, but some sort of thing. So I don't think that should be a huge thing. But again, this would take place on Tuesday. And it's just the difference being that everyone coming has to have food. It's not about bar services anymore.
Matt, his hand up.
Yeah, what does this mean for someone like Cisco?
I would say Cisco right now is, because of this, is operating under, the state gave us the ability to determine if the mobile food unit service did constitute a food service permit, which it does, and they have food service. So they will have to comply with this as well. Folks will have to order from the food trucks at the same time. It might be, the point here we'll have to read about, it have to be ordered at the same time. We might have to work on that because it's separate businesses. But again, people will have to be eating at those tables as well.
Other comments? We can wait until, just let this go into effect Tuesday, or we can define food now. I want to get a sense of people's opinion of that.
Melissa, just got her hand up.
Thank you. My sense is, Malcolm, that as Greg implied and as Amy sort of clarified, that was already the intention of our
Right.
order. I'm not sure how strictly we need to go about and worry about fining people this weekend, but I'm thinking whatever message we're sending out to restaurants with these new updates, and as they're hearing it, they're going to probably bombard Amy with emails for clarification. And if she can clarify that for them, that our hope is that, food between now and Tuesday, food is not a prepackaged item. And I think stating that clearly as our intention and goal as a town is important.
I agree. I think if we do sort of motion, and that'll just be a little bit confusing when we don't quite understand it ourselves. I'm comfortable with, the message is going to be very clear. I'm sure every restaurant owner in the town is watching this now. And so my opinion is we'll just let it go. And the message is we have defined what food is, and people know that. Anybody want to do anything else?
Malcolm, could we, I'm sure you're probably already going to do this, but just send an email out clarifying common victular. We've already asked you to do this. Tuesday, it's a state order as well.
Yes, yeah, definitely going to go out. The part that's hard for us, and that's really for the people watching and for the boards to see, is we have no advance notice of this either. We find out at the same time as the governor puts that release out. We weren't told yesterday, we weren't told on Monday that this was coming. We would have prepped for it. So the fact that this is coming up right now at the Board of Health meeting in the middle of the day, it wasn't intended to be just
Right.
a Friday afternoon, throw it in your face to the restaurants. We want to make that explicitly clear. We found out at the same time that you did too.
Well, Friday afternoons is always when things either go wrong or those of us in medicine, it's always the sickest patients come in Friday afternoon. So
Yeah, at the end of the day on a full moon.
exactly. So I think there's a general consensus of both boards that we'll send a message out. People know what's happening. And on Tuesday, then there'll be a little more teeth of enforcement for the town staff.
Sounds good.
Anything else on this issue, or should we go on to the next agenda, which is enforcement update?
I think Libby and Christy have something to say.
I have to fix my screen so I can see everybody.
Maybe this is something to come back to, but before this meeting ends, I think we need to have at least a discussion about the hours of the food service establishments. And I want Chief just to mention the police presence issue and what we're trying to get organized for that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to follow the agenda. I think it's on there.
Sure. Okay.
That's actually the next thing on the agenda.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't even pull it up. I'm like,
No, it's all right. I think at some point we obviously are going to, with all this new information and some information about how enforcement's going and what's happened in the last week, we'll get to discussing that issue.
Christy?
Thank you. Amy or Roberto, just a clarification question. When it comes to no more alcohol to go, does that rescind the cocktails to go as well? So any type of food takeout you can no longer order?
I believe so. I'm furiously reading through this. I would say I expected some pullback, but that's a shock, honestly. I thought that was done obviously to help them and to allow people to eat at home and to still. So that's a bit of a shock, honestly, but I assume it is everything. It's looking like no alcohol to go at all. So I'm going to send them a quick note now and say, let us absorb this and get through the details and get them something in the next few hours.
I highly recommend that once this meeting is over, to go back and go onto YouTube and watch the governor's presentation, because some of these questions were brought up and he was adamant about how this is to be done, and he definitely shut it down. I said, with food at the table, no to go. And it's just really important to see that this is a perfect example of the few ruining it for the many. He explicitly called out a couple towns and a couple parties that were reported to him. He explicitly called them and called them out in his press conference. And he said, the party, the wedding, the 300-person wedding in Gardner, the drive-in concert series, he actually called it out. And he says that. He calls it out in his order. So he was adamant. So it's really kind of a bombshell.
Roberto, Amy, just to clarify one last time, the to-go alcohols, that restriction starts Tuesday.
The 11th.
Yes, and we will, as with anything with alcohol, should be receiving a advisory from the ABCC. So I wait for that and take that, and that's the official notice to all the licensees.
Okay.
Okay. Now I can see everybody.
All right.
Okay, so I know when someone has their hand up, and well, Jason, he's younger. He knows these electronic things. Okay, so it says enforcement update on the agenda. Is that what we're going to talk about?
Yep, that's the chief and Amy that we were just talking about.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. We've been getting some requests to have an official presence, whatever that means, in the Broad Street area at night. And just my observations, and Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, you've been down there certainly more than I have, is basically after 9 o'clock at night, the strip, as we call it, has become a haven for teens, young adults, and drunks. And the later the night goes, the more disorderly and the more crowded it's become. It certainly is a gathering place. It's not, we're not dealing with just a few lines here for a couple of restaurants. You know, there may be 20 or 30 or 40 people in the restaurant lines, but there's hundreds across the street in the parking lot of the steamship and along the sidewalk there. And then we have the problem with the juice bar line that's extending way up around on the Water Street, impinging upon the area that was set aside for the Rosencrown. We've gotten complaints from the Rosencrown about that. The issue that we have is staffing. The request was to put CSOs down there. Well, CSOs are not hired or trained to do crowd control. Matter of fact, if you recall, back in 2008, we had a serious incident down on the Strip that started from a CSO or a summer special officer at the time, dealing with some kids that got into the street, and he told them to get out of the street. And we had a serious incident that resulted in the disbanding of the summer special program. So putting CSOs down there is not a viable option. They're not trained for that, nor are they hired for that. Plus, we have a limited number this year. We have less than half of what we had in prior years because of the COVID restrictions. Police officers, I'm 6 short of, or actually 7 short of full-time bodies right now on police officers. They're answering call to call. They're going wherever they can. We put them on beach patrol on overtime a week or 2 ago. We've had trouble filling the shifts, but what I've decided to do is cancel those. The fire department is going to pick up the beach patrols for the fires. I've canceled the beach patrols for law enforcement, and we're going to assign those people downtown on the Strip to manage the crowds down there. Now, inevitably, when you have police officers dealing with people that are being unruly, somebody ultimately gets arrested at some point. So we need to be aware that that's a potential outcome of putting the police officers down there, because these kids are not being courteous or reasonable in a lot of cases. We've been running into it all over town, not even just downtown, but on the beaches and everywhere else. And, you know, we've been dealing with it as professionally and responsibly as we can, but inevitably, there's going to be an issue. I would urge the Board of Health to close those businesses at midnight like the other businesses downtown. That would eliminate a big part of the problem in terms of the crowds. It has become a one central gathering point for everybody after the restaurants close, and that's out. And, you know, many of these teens, I wonder if their parents know where they're at and what they're doing. But, you know, between Children's Beach and the Strip, those are just packed with people at night. So, you know, we're going to put officers out there, but I think I would urge the Board of Health to maybe consider some curbing of the hours down there or something in the interest of public health, because what we've noticed also at night is masks are virtually non-existent. Social distancing is virtually non-existent. And, you know, it's just not something that police officers should or, you know, are necessarily the right tool to deal with some of that stuff. I think rules and guidelines for the restaurants and everything, and maybe hours changes might be the way to deal with it.
I'll follow up on Chief there, and I have been out most weekends until after closing and all of that. The observations down there, yes, the main groups of packs of people are the youngsters, are the, you know, you're thinking 13, 14, you know, teenagers, packs. And that was probably the group that didn't have masks the most. They would see me or an officer pull them up. So certainly that did help to some sense. As far as, you know, closing earlier, for some of those businesses, they're already, the main problem is between, say, 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. One thing that we've tried to do is say, you know, we can help them and curb some space, but we need a mutual kind of relationship to do this. The restaurants that we had problems with before, we worked with, and they hired doormen to deal with some of those lines that weren't even half as bad as this other things that we are seeing. So that's kind of where we're trying to work on that. We're trying to get some barriers and things of that sort. But why we need the restaurants and these businesses to work with us is because if we come down there, we clear it out. We clear people out. And if they are doing it, they're working with their customers. They're less likely maybe to lose those customers. I'm going to call out Sunken Ship, who I thought was doing a great job. Today, they had a long line. It went, down to the corner of South Water, and they had an employee out there most of the time, engaging with their customers, kind of watching the line, keeping people separate, talking to the kids, saying, hey, what do you want to go buy? That's exactly what we're talking about. I'm going to say I thought they did a great job, and their person was out there and engaging with their customers. So I want to say I felt like that was a good example of what we're really looking for some of these folks to do. And when I asked for assistance, that's what we're asking for. And as far as the other part, the late night tends to happen when the bars close or when the restaurants closed. There's a little more room for people to stretch out at that point in time, but that's when that happens. So the earlier closure on Saturday, as far as what I saw, seemed to make it just a little bit earlier. So it wasn't 1:30 a.m. It was more like midnight. But again, those were my observations so far. The restaurants didn't see as many problems at all. Most closed by 10 anyway. And the few that were open later seemed to be fine. We didn't seem to have any problems as far as what I saw.
Matt, can I speak?
Speak.
Can you hear me? Oh, good. There we go. Sorry, I didn't think you could hear me. No, I've seen it without Amy or other people downtown. I've seen it with, and when the town has a presence downtown, the businesses are asking people to do a lot of the things that Amy's describing, but the people aren't listening. But when you put someone with a town car or someone in a town vehicle or an officer across the street, they actually listen. And I think that this is a joint effort. I think some of the businesses are really trying. They've got 3 or 4 people out trying to take orders and try to do these things. And, they're shorthanded too. They're in the same boat that the town is in. So I think that everyone has to, come together on this to deal with it. And I'm glad to hear that we're doing that because, that's what I've heard from 5 or 6 different people, and that 5 or 6 different businesses saying, we need to see a presence. There used to be an officer on down here every night, and there hardly has been this summer. And so I'm glad to hear that we're doing that. That was their experience. That's what, my experience growing up, we knew that, and we didn't have the internet back then, so we all had to go back to that area to find out where the next place to go was. These kids don't even do that. They go down there to meet. The other thing I would say, in regards to Children's, maybe we close it. Maybe Children's is closed as of a certain hour. If we have to keep it clear, if there's 100 kids or 200 kids there at night, that's a gathering. Let's close it. I'm not adverse to. If there are any wise guys that are giving flack and not listening, I'm not adverse to arresting a couple of them because I think everyone will pay attention. They'll know that it's serious and they'll pay attention.
Chief.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. McNabb. So I guess, Matt, through you to Matt, I need some clarification as to what you want us to do down there, because you sounds like you want us to just go down there and sit in a cruiser and our presence alone will make everybody obey, which tells me that the restaurants are still managing their own crowds, or are you wanting us to go down there and manage their crowd for them? That I need clear instructions to what you need, because the guys won't know what to do. They'll just go on their own devices as to what they see, and that's when we inevitably have problems. So I need some instruction from the select board as to what you want us to do down there, and we'll do it, whatever it is.
I could make it up on the fly, Chief, but this is why I've been asking for a written enforcement plan. If something happens, what's next? I can tell you what I think. I think as soon as someone steps in line, in the queue for the juice bar inside the lines they've set up, I think it's their responsibility to deal with it. I think if they're on a sidewalk across the street, if they're if they're in the road, I think that's where it's a public safety issue. I think that's where the town, and this is just one person, I'm not speaking for the Board of Health or for anyone else here, but I think that's where your guys can move them along. Say, excuse me, please disperse. When Amy showed up at Gaslight, they ran like there were a bunch of young kids there standing outside. It was like rats leaving a ship. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they all took off. I think you'll see more of that than less. So I don't, if we're around, I think it will be less, less than we all think.
Jason.
Chief, would it help if we knew exactly what the 2 or 3 restaurants that are producing the big lines on the strip, what they're doing to manage it and working? I know Jerry Mack has been working with them already, and can he be the conduit to talk to whoever the officers are at night and say, look, no gatherings over, I guess, 50 people. I'm trying to keep it something where we have numbers, right? Everybody's gathering in that little, steamship parking lot area over there. We have to, break that up, help them manage the lines. I don't know. I'm trying to give you something that's concrete. Libby?
I don't know if I was going to really say anything other than I don't think the gatherings apply to people in the lines. And if it's officers telling people to move along, that's fine. Part of the problem has been they don't move along. So I think we're kind of saying that maybe if that is happening where they're not moving along, they're going to get a ticket.
Libby, I meant the gatherings like in different areas, not in the lines. If like at midnight, we're big groups of people.
I don't think that's considered an organized gathering, but maybe Greg can clarify that a little bit more. And again, we're probably all trying to read the order as we're sitting here.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would agree with Libby. I believe that the gathering order applies to something that is more like an organized gathering rather than people who are waiting in line at a restaurant or a retail establishment. If you look at the actual order, the first part of it says that, if you're subject to a sector-specific rule, then it's the sector-specific rule that applies to your business. And we know that the restaurants have sector-specific rules, although I don't believe that those rules specifically address lines. The other thing that leads me to believe that this gathering order doesn't apply is that it says on page 3, gatherings subject to the limitations of this section include, without limitation, community, civic, public, leisure, sporting events, concerts, conferences, conventions, fundraisers, fairs, festivals, road races, and other similar events or activities. Except as provided in sections 1 or 2, these restrictions apply to gatherings in all public and private venues, including private homes, backyards, parks, athletic fields, and parking lot. This order does not impose general capacity limitation on large unenclosed public spaces, such as beaches and recreation areas. The limitations of this order instead specifically applicable to programs, celebrations, social outings, and similar events that draw groups of people together. Such gatherings are subject to the limitations of this order when they take place within large unenclosed spaces, etc. So I think that the purpose of this order really is to get at more of an organized party or event, like a barbecue or a wedding or a concert, things of that nature. I don't think that it's it's really focused on people waiting in line, because that's not something that's planned. While, I would imagine that, during the summer, the lines that you're talking about are every single day. It's not like somebody is advertising a group gathering. It tends to be more happenstance that all of these people showed up at the same time. So I don't think that line constitutes a gathering. I do, however, believe that, social distancing requirements apply in terms of making sure that people stay 6 feet apart, making sure that they're wearing masks, and that it is the duty of the business owner to enforce those things in the first instance. And certainly, as we've talked about many times before, if the limitations of the governor's orders are not working in Nantucket due to its unique position and characteristics, then the Board of Health should think about whether it should adopt its own definition of gatherings and define what constitutes a gathering on the island of Nantucket.
Melissa?
Thank you, Malcolm. I just want to sort of refocus the conversation for a second, because I feel like we're talking about two different things. I think one is the concept of whether or not we should be requiring those restaurants that are takeout only, primarily on the Strip is where our focus is, would close earlier. And that's one thing that I think seems like a staff recommendation and something for the Board of Health to consider. That would both help enforcement, is what I'm hearing Chief Pittman say, in terms of just naturally dispersing those gatherings of young people. And I, like you, Matt, was one of them as a teenager. And I do remember oftentimes trying to avoid police presence, somewhere on the Strip as a kid, because it is a natural place. We don't have a lot of places for teenagers to hang out. And the unfortunate thing is that this is not the summer to be casual about anything. So I think as a community, we're up against a lot of things. One, we want to support our businesses to the best extent possible within the confines of public health, because we want them to have an opportunity to make money and support their families and be successful going into next winter. We want public health and safety, of course, to be at the top of the priority list to stop the spread of COVID. And frankly, of those lines, some of the things that I'm most concerned about actually do become a public safety issue, which is just they're getting out onto the streets and interfering with traffic. And God forbid some kid goes to run across the street to get an ice cream at 10 o'clock at night, but they've been forced out into the street. Like, I don't even want to think about the worst case scenario, but to me, that's the danger of the line. And the last comment I want to make is that the way I understand the social distancing and the mask orders, masks are required downtown. That does not mean that we have to have lines with 6 feet apart distance between the people who are standing in those lines. And if I'm wrong about that, I'd really love to be corrected, but I'm not sure it's the business's responsibility to make sure that people are masked and 6 feet apart. But if they are waiting in line to go into their business, that they're in line and masked. And there's a lot of confusion about this within the community, and I'm sure you've all seen it, some public shaming. Here's a big group, but they're all masked and they're all outside. Is that okay? Because if it is okay, then what we're really talking about is a cooperative effort of businesses having staff members going outside, making sure their patrons are masked, and safely waiting in line, not impeding with traffic, doing what they can to take extra orders, an additional police presence in town at night, just making sure that people know that someone from the town is downtown and keeping an eye on things, and working to the best of our ability to manage crowds and manage public safety. I don't think it's as complex as we're making it sound, but maybe I'm missing something. I don't think it has to be the extreme of do nothing or start arresting people. And I think that, like Matt said, just when we have a natural presence, kids aren't going to want to be around where anyone with an official looking presence is. They're just not going to want to do that. And maybe if we're lucky, they'll go home. So if we need to make a decision on a recommendation about closing at midnight, I think we should separate that from the conversation of enforcement. And perhaps that was already talked about, and we're planning to do that. But to me, although they're related, that should be a separate conversation, because that's going to have significant financial impacts on those businesses. And if it's truly a public health risk to have them open later, I'd like to hear from our Roberto about that and what his recommendation is to that extent.
All right, thank you. I think that was very clear. I think, right, there are two issues here. Enforcement, how chiefs force acts and so forth is really a discussion, I think, with the select board and the chief, not necessarily the Board of Health. And if we all want to continue that, that's fine. Or we can go to this question about having businesses close early. What's the consensus? Because we can go either way. I'm sorry, Melissa.
That's okay, Malcolm. Thank you. I just wanted to add that, I rely on the recommendations from people who know more about public health than I do. So if Roberto has a recommendation to that effect, I think that's what we should considering.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we discuss, have Roberto give us a recommendation? Because obviously last week we said the major item on this meeting's agenda would be whether or not we close those businesses early. And I will defer the question of police presence and strategy and how that's going to be done to the select board and the staff. So I'm going to move the discussion and have Roberto give us his thoughts. First, answer the question about masks and social distancing, because there is some confusion about that. And then we will go on and talk about what we did last week, essentially continue the conversation of last week about the possibility of early closing for some businesses that are not serving alcohol, say. Greg, then we'll go to Roberto.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. With respect to this issue of waiting in line, the governor or the Department of Public Health's May 1st guidance for wearing face masks in public settings clearly states that people who are waiting in line must be wearing masks and maintaining 6 feet of distance. The relevant language says, any person who is in a place open to the public in the Commonwealth, when unable to maintain a distance of approximately 6 feet from any other person, shall cover their mouth and nose with a mask or face covering. Masks are required at all times when inside or waiting in line outside of grocery stores, pharmacies, and other retail stores. The use of a mask does not replace important social distancing measures. All individuals must continue to maintain more than 6 feet of distance from other people, wash hands regularly with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, and stay home when sick. So in my opinion, there are 2 parts of this. Masks are required at all times when inside or waiting in a line outside, and the use of the mask does not replace the requirement of 6 feet of social distancing, meaning you must be both 6 feet apart and wearing the mask.
Thank you. That's very clear.
I think that answers the question.
That answers the question. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the possibility of having extending our orders to close businesses early that we sort of exempted last week. So I'd like Roberto to comment on that, and then we should get public comment on such, if we can get that. So Roberto, you have the floor.
All right. So, in light of Greg's recommendation, I'm really happy to hear about 6 feet and masks. I thought that was actually in our order, but I'm glad to see that it's in the governor's order. So, as far as closing early, absolutely. That was my recommendation last week. Amy?
The only thing I wanted to comment is, since we're trying to address the line problem and the gathering problem, if we're talking about moving everything to midnight or something similar, that doesn't tackle the problem that really is happening earlier. So when you're talking about an earlier closure, the midnight or earlier might affect some of the other late night things that go on after the restaurants close, but it doesn't really tackle the main gathering time, which is earlier. So that's where I struggle with making a recommendation on that level.
I think we all struggle with that because the only really option would be to close things down at 8 o'clock, which I'm not sure would be acceptable to a lot of people. We may have to do that, or put in, I don't know. Go ahead, Roberto.
Yeah, we're not to the point of a curfew or going.
Yeah, that was the word I was looking for.
Yeah,
because that we could do, and that would solve. It would create an awful lot of problems, though. And then poor Chief Pittman would be spending all of his evenings chasing people around the island. So.
Oh, we can the Board of Health can absolutely put in a curfew, especially the emergency order. But then we also have to be prepared for the pitchforks, the Molotov cocktails, and things like that.
Yeah, well, we may get to that point. I'm not sure we're there yet. Melissa.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. I saying, Amy, and I think there's a few select businesses that are having some issues. I think the pinch points are between 8 and 11 from what I've been hearing anecdotally. Primarily, we don't have a Thursday, Friday, Saturday issue so much because for visitors who are here on vacation, every night's like a weekend night. And I also think, things are not going to slow down perhaps as much as we think they may heading into September because schools are being delayed. I think families are going to continue to be coming here pretty strongly through August. So, and I say that in the context of, I'm not really in support of closing any earlier than midnight. I think that a midnight closure both allows the businesses the opportunities to have that fruitful sale of food because, sun sets later, we eat later, summer's later, it's fine. But communication with businesses on line enforcement and then some kind of presence in town helping to ensure that when we see those gatherings that look unsafe, we've got someone saying we've got to break it up. And I know it's not perfect, but to me that makes a lot of sense. And if there's questions on specifically the how to do that, I don't know how to answer that question because I'm not in enforcement. I have to defer to professionals to do that.
Christy.
Thank you. So I feel like for the past couple of months, we've stressed that we're not going to be more strict or roll back things until the public health data, pushes us in that direction. So I'm a little bit hesitant to close down early when we're not seeing, a sharp rise in cases. What we're really talking about is a difficulty in managing the lines. So I hate to say, let's wait and see. And I know that Roberto has that recommendation. I don't want to go against our public health director, but I'm also a little bit hesitant to kind of put something forward that isn't backed by data or a spike in cases. So I'm almost feeling like if we waited a week and see if we can put some measures in place to help with lines, making sure that we're clear about the 6 feet and the masks, and then take steps forward. But without the increase in cases, it just seems like we're tackling the wrong problem.
Well, we want to prevent increase in cases too. Jim, do you have any thoughts?
I do. I have a question. I've been up and down Main Street every single day for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and there's no way that everybody has a mask and everybody, or even anybody, is 6 foot away from each other. I've seen 6, 7 kids leaning up against a drugstore window, talking all the time. In fact, I asked a few of them to put their mask on. They were very nice. They did. But there's nobody you see on Main Street is 6 feet away from the next person. So I don't think people in that line down there necessarily, you will ever get them to wear a mask and 6 feet away from each other. I thought part of it is impossible. I don't know what else you want to do, but I don't see how you can get that many people to be able to mask, but I don't see how you're going to be enforcing 6 feet away from how many people are there? Hundreds.
And thank you. And Meredith, I know you recuse yourself, so I don't know if you can really comment.
Yeah, I have to recuse myself. I do think that there's an issue of people wearing masks. I don't know how you would enforce 6 feet, but I think asking people, I mean, I walked from the Stop and Shop parking lot down to the High Line yesterday morning and had to ask 4 people to put masks on because they were walking around with them down around their chins. So I do think that people aren't, and that was at 10 o'clock in the morning. So
right.
I'm sure at 10 o'clock at night, it's a lot worse.
Okay, thank you. So we're discussing the concept of closing essentially all the restaurants or all the food service establishments at midnight. Can we get public comment, Roberto or Libby or Erica?
No one's in attendance.
No one?
Nope.
Yeah, you don't have any.
Yeah.
Okay. So does Jim?
What is the usual time that the restaurants and the business down the strip closes?
Roberto, you want to?
1:30, 2?
2 a.m. It's the strip has allowances for 2 a.m. closures.
Okay.
Not all stay open, obviously, that long, but they were granted that ability till 2 a.m.
So
Large percentage of a couple of those businesses that, they do a large percentage of their business between midnight and 2. I think that'll shift. If the bars shift, I think that business will shift. So if the bars are closing 11:30, they might do that between 11:30 and 1 or something. But
all right, so we're working ourselves up to a potential motion for closure at midnight. Does anyone have any other comments they want to make? Yes, Melissa?
Thank you, Malcolm. I really take Christie's considerations very strongly, and I also don't want to buck a recommendation from public health, and yet at the same time, this community transmission isn't happening here. And is this a high-risk space? What's making it a high-risk space? I think I'm not clear on why this is a recommendation. And I feel like I need a little bit more clarity on the why to support having that kind of impact.
Roberto.
Great. I think I'm muted. Oh, no, I'm not. Really what it comes down to is what I described last week and the week before that and the week before that and the week before that, about how all of this is about behavior. When you start putting the orders in, especially closing something like midnight, you, like Matt said, you shift the hours in which all of these things start happening. when you start and the actions of the way these things start happening. And from an enforcement standpoint, what some of the people what we're hearing about some people being afraid of when it comes to how the interaction goes. I'm going to let the chief answer that one. But I also believe that the quicker things start happening, yes, you'll have some people who sit at a restaurant and just try to binge before that midnight closure. And that does happen. However, that will be the minority. And when it comes to the mask ordering and things, what you'll see out there is, especially during the day, yes, because we're so hyper aware of seeing people without masks, we're focusing on the people without masks. But the great majority of the people during the day are wearing masks. At night, when they're leaving when we're leaving the restaurant, when people are leaving restaurants after having a significant amount of drinks and things like that, they're not. The great majority are no longer wearing masks. So that's why my recommendation is there at midnight. And I know the chief also wants to say something on this.
Yeah, I want to hear the chief, because I remember the chief mentioned he was for this. Chief, go ahead.
Yeah. So to answer the question about why this is a bigger problem down there, then, there's probably not one single person more down there this year than there was last year. We have crowds down there all the time. The big difference is we've completely changed the landscape down there. We have now closed all the businesses so people can't get into them. So everybody's on the sidewalk. Even you order your sandwich from the sidewalk. That's the place where people used to congregate before. Now when they congregate there, they're intermixing with people that are ordering their food. So we've displaced some parking down there. We should probably displace all the parking down there, make this work even better. That might be a kind of do it like Hyannis did, where literally cut the street in half and let the people congregate on that part of the street. That might help with this distancing. We've created, last year the juice bar line went down Broad Street and all the way down around South Water Street every night, like it does this year. The only difference was there wasn't a restaurant on the sidewalk on South Water Street in front of the Rosencrown last year. People were able to go down there. So, we're trying to put 10 pounds of cement into a 5-pound bag right now, and it just isn't working. And you add to that, we've got the tensions in the community about all, in the world, actually, about all being the restrictions, the quarantines, the changes of rules, the frequent changing of rules. People are just on edge to begin with. And there's a certain number of people, and like I said, the risky behaviors that we encounter, the later you go at night, the more alcohol fueled the problems become. And, and that it was that way last year. It's just that last year it was all spread out. This year it's all focused in one area. So besides the COVID risks, that's a whole different issue. I'm just talking about the general crowd control, crowd management issues. Now, Town had a line problem at their business, Town and Queequegs. We required them to hire people to deal with their crowd problem, and they took care of it for the most part. That doesn't seem to be an option down on Broad Street. Apparently the crowd is too big for the businesses to control or manage, or at least by the people that they're hiring. That's why now I'm being asked to put police officers in there. Police officers have a very limited bag of tools from which we can operate on, in that environment. And you can't, it's not a good idea to put a police officer in there and have people tell them, no, I'm not going to do it, and then have them turn around and walk away, because then the next day, nobody will do it. And everybody will be expecting the police officers to walk away. And that doesn't happen. That's why we don't want police officers enforcing these types of rules for the most part. The only tool we have to use down there is the obstruction of a sidewalk bylaw. If persons obstructing the sidewalk, we tell them to move on. They refuse, that's an arrestable offense. That at that point, if they refuse to give us a proper name. And believe me, we've been telling people, wear your mask, do this, do that. And we already get people that tell us their name is Mickey Mouse and they live on, Disneyland Boulevard as their ID. That's not acceptable by our bylaws when a police officer encounters that. And, they have to positively identify themselves to that police officer or they get arrested. If we turn our back and walk away, then tomorrow everybody's Mickey Mouse. So we can't do it that way. So, we're willing to do it and we're going to have the officers down there starting tonight. But like I said, I need a conversation at some point with the select board to find out exactly what you want us to do. Because, just having an official presence is really not instructive. You're going to have to live with the fallout that comes with that. Do you want us to manage the lines? Do you want us to do what they should be doing? We can manage the lines. The way we do it is we tell people, this is the end of the line. You go away. And hopefully they will, that kind of thing.
Well, if I can, to the chief, if it's not the police chief, who would it be? Well, what would your suggestion be in this circumstance to get, because the businesses, they aren't listening to the businesses and they are, and it is, some people are frequenting those businesses and a lot of people are just hanging out, waiting to talk to their friends. If it's not the police, what's your recommendation for us to improve enforcement down there?
Could we defer that? What I would suggest we finish about whether we're not going to extend our order of last week, and then we'll let Jason and the selectmen discuss about police activity. Otherwise, we'll be talking around forever. I just everything I hear, I agree with. Christie's point and Melissa's point, the chief's point. Roberto's point. The problem is we don't have a manual. We don't have a book. A year from now, this will all be easy. We'll look back on it and say, well, we should have done this. We did this right. We did that wrong. I just don't want to, we have to do something. It may not be the right thing. So I would be in favor of early closing. And we will see how it goes. Jim, you had a comment, then we'll try to get a motion, one way or the other.
I do.
Yes.
Malcolm, I have a question.
Yes.
My question is, it seems to me the biggest problem is the masks and the people in the line. And I agree with the chief. I don't think it's the policeman's job to be down there to do that. They have a more important job to do. And I think we just have to decide with the masks in the line, whose problem is that?
Right.
And to just say, we're going to shut them down at this time, I don't think that's going to stop the mask and the line problem. So I have a problem with just arbitrarily just saying, okay, we're going to shut them down an hour early. I just don't think that's the answer.
So you would support that motion?
No.
So if we do that motion, and Melissa, how would you feel about that? Because it's just the three of us here that can vote.
I have to say I agree with Jim. I feel uncomfortable with it. And I think that I'd like to see what happens this week as a result of the governor's new order and restaurant closures and lack of takeout of alcohol. So I don't feel like it's something that, frankly, if we were going to discuss an earlier closure, I'd say I'd be more comfortable even with 1 a.m. than 2 a.m. And to me, that may help a bit, but.
All right. So I think the conclusion will be, since there's only 3 of us that can vote on this and 2 people would not support an early closure, there's no reason to even make a motion at this point because it's not going to pass. Jim, Melissa, correct?
That's the way I feel. I'm so, you know, I mean, and I don't think closing it from 2 to 1 is even going to solve the problem. We've heard tonight is this, that it's just as busy there at 10 o'clock at night. So if it's as busy as 10 o'clock, it is at 1 o'clock, then in reality, we should close them down at 10 o'clock. But to me, the only problem that I see that keeps popping up is the distancing, and people will not wear their mask. And I don't think by closing them down, it'll solve the problem of the distancing or make people increase putting their mask on. Unless I hear and I'd like to hear from somebody else about that.
Well, it looks like we're not going to pass that tonight because it would be a 2 to 1 vote. So we might as well not even bring it up. And so, Roberto, you any comment? And then I'm going to give it back to Jason, and he can go on and discuss the police activities.
I have no comment.
Okay.
Malcolm,
yes.
taking public comment from Stephanie Cunningham.
Good.
Would that be okay?
Please.
Okay. I think Erica is.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I just had an idea, which was if you had like numbers, like they used to have at delis where you'd pick a number and all the people could wait like in the parking lot across the street and they could call out numbers for people to come up, to step up to the line.
Thank you. Should be considered. Anyone else?
Amy?
Amy?
I was just going to respond to that to say that that was something in the conversation we had with some of the businesses as well. But again, that's where we're asking for them to rethink their operations and how it would best work. And then we could respond with more space or defining the space or that. So that is an idea I think that those businesses would have to consider if it works for their operation.
Well, I just don't want to go around in circles forever and talk about all this. I would be for early closing. It's not going to happen from the Board of Health at the present time, given the fact there are only 3 of us that are going to vote. So again, Jason, you can have the rest of the meeting and discuss all these other issues.
Okay, thank you. Matt, do you have your hand up?
And just a couple comments. One was, I think some of the businesses have looked at sort of the deli things. There's online stuff. I think it's QMinder is one of them that people can use. It's difficult to even consider if you're shorthanded in this time of year. It's very difficult to implement something like that. We made changes here 3 months ago and just finally finished them now. It's, your Comcast won't work and your card swipes don't work. And then you have to have a separate app to, notify people by text. There's a whole bunch of parts to that. And unfortunately, if we're in this next year, I bet you a couple of these places will have that figured out. But having them figure that out in the next, week or 2 is not going to get there. But I think it's a good idea. The other part is I think I think the chief's suggestion to take parking off the street, I think closing half of the alley there, South Beach Alley, whatever it's called, I think closing half of that and seeing how that goes, having a presence of some type, if we could, figure out what that means, I think those things could help. Right now, from a business standpoint, last week or this week is the peak. Next week will be about the same. And I know all this from how much bread we sell. I can tell how many people here, how busy we are. The week after that goes down 10 or 20%, and then it goes in half. I don't think it's going to go quite like that this year. I think it's going to go down, 6 or 8, and then it'll go in, 30%, not in half for the first week of September. But, we're at the peak over the next 2 weekends probably, 3 weekends. So I think that's what we have to focus on right now is what's the most cooperative, best way to get through those weeks safely.
So just a couple of questions for Chief, just to get us, push this along. Chief, the presence of your officers that you're putting down there, is that in response to a select board request? And you feel it's needed for public safety, or is it just in response to one of us?
It's a response to the select board request, yes.
Okay. And is that just Matt's request? Because I don't know, did we request that last week? Did we suggest it? I just want to clarify.
It just to be clear, I mean, it was, well, I'd defer to the town manager, but her and I have had several discussions about this. I don't know who all she's had discussions with, but it's just a lot of different things with fewer people. Nobody anticipated we'd have this many people this year. I think everybody in this board back in March and April thought this would have been lucky if we'd had 50% of what we normally have. But, we don't. We got everybody.
Matt, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I've made it, I've made it, and a few businesses have made it in letters to us. I've made it, through Libby and to Amy, and I think some of the businesses have asked as well. As they've struggled, they've been asking. And so I think it's, but I don't know what the solution is. That's why I was asking Chief Pittman, if it's not them, how do we do it? And I don't, and that's what we have to sort of figure out.
Melissa? I'm sorry, Chief, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think we need to understand there's a convergence of a couple of issues here that are totally unrelated to Broad Street in itself, so to speak. For instance, in an ordinary year, when we would hire seasonal staff, we hire 41 seasonal staff. Out of that 41, we usually get 8 to 10 of them are reserve police officers. However, because the state has tightened up the rules on reserve police officers, this year we got 3. And next year, because of the legislation that's in the House right now, we'll probably have none. And we still have the same number of full-time officers as we've had for several years now, with all of the assignments we have to have. For instance, we have to have officers at the airport in order for the TSA to approve screened flights to Boston. So that's where 2 of our 3 reserve officers go right now, to the airport. So, on top of the COVID, we've also got these staffing shortages that were in part self-imposed when we chose to hire a full complement of lifeguards and only half the number of seasonal staff, but also when we couldn't get even half of the normal number of reserve officers that we get for the summer. So, a much longer term discussion is going to have to be held sooner than later about how we deal with this even next year, even if things are back to normal. Right now, I only have a very limited tool bag that I can use. And right now, it's going to take forced overtime to get guys to cover that downtown area at night. We know it's exposed. We know it's been vacant. And we've tried to cover it with on-duty guys as much as we can, but I send you the list every day. You see what's going on. They're going from loud party to loud party, all night long now. And so, it's going to take forced overtime to probably fill all those, to keep that presence downtown. We're going to have to remove, right now we have one of the reserve, because we only need 2 at the airport. The third one goes out to Sconset and works at night at Sconset. The reason we do that is so that the full-time guys don't have to respond to Sconset for improperly parked car calls or minor offenses and things. But we're going to pull that Sconset patrol, put them down in the Strip and downtown. So that way we at least got a 7-day-a-week presence down there if I can't get people to fill the overtime. But the result is going to be one of the 3 full-time guys that we have on duty at night is going to have to drive to Sconset when somebody calls because somebody from the summer house is parked on their lawn in front of their house, that kind of thing. Which means the call to Matticat is going to take 10 times longer to get to when that comes in. So, we're trying to juggle all these things in this year of COVID on top of it. So I think, in answer to the question that was asked earlier, what could we do? Well, I think a lot of it has to be an administrative function somehow. There needs to be some administrative changes down on the strip. We all know that's been a mess and crowded for a long time. And somebody commented the other day that, the juice bar, how long, it's always been crowded like that, and people crowd into the street, and that's true. This year it's worse because of all the restrictions and the spacing and everything else. So we need to figure out how to do that. Maybe we need to close down the South Beach extension and let people congregate there and not let cars go through there. Maybe we need to, as I suggested, make Broad Street half as wide as it is and block that off and let in more room for people to congregate. Those types of solutions are going to go a lot farther than putting 2 police officers or 4 police officers in the downtown area on a regular, and I think have a more positive image and impact for the town. My guys are doing their best to be positive and doing their best to be helpful and everything. We don't want to sound like we're the obstructionists all the time, but we are realists. We know, through experience what happens when we're encountering in these types of situations. And we don't like the outcomes, especially in this day when everything the police do is looked at. First of all, we look to see what negative can come out of it before we look at the positive impact that they've done. You guys have heard the complaints, and you always know that when you hear both sides of the story, it oftentimes is different than what, the initial complaint was, but we're doing our best to try to avoid these negative encounters and these negative situations in this day and age.
Melissa, you had your hand up. Thank you, Chief.
I don't remember what I was going to say.
Matt?
It's just a general comment. If for argument's sake, let's say the juice bar decides they've had enough, they're shorthanded, they can't they've got 4 people outside every night trying to do the line, and they say, forget it, we're not doing it. What will happen, I think, is the bubble's just going to push somewhere else. And you're going to see that demand is going to be on Main Street, and it's going to be down at Jack and Charlie's, it's going to be at Island Kitchen, a couple of which are already pretty stacked themselves at certain times. And so, in some ways, I think what the chief is talking about, sort of widening the road, making more space, at least you contain the problem in one area, and you're not closing at 10 or, and pushing it out, or you're not closing these specific businesses. And, if we can find a way to accommodate these businesses, we know where the problem is going to lie. If these businesses just say, forget it, I can't do it anymore, the problem's going to just move elsewhere. And so I think we have to be realistic and say, okay, how is it, what changes can we make structurally, presence-wise with the police, presence-wise with Board of Health officers or someone else, who could it be, and then see how it goes, give it a week, and see if we can improve it with those changes.
Melissa, then Christy.
Oh, thank you. I really like, Chief, your ideas about both blocking off, Broad Street, maybe half width, and also South Beach Extension, even if it is just, from, 7 to midnight or something like that, a time when traffic, it doesn't affect businesses, loading zones, all of those things. So I really like that suggestion, and I don't know what it would take to make that a reality. But what I'm realizing is that these recommendations, combined with Roberto's recommendation on closing earlier, are sort of the combined effort to disperse crowds downtown. And it's making me reconsider the closing of businesses earlier in that neighborhood, because I think we have a limited toolbox, to quote what you just said, Chief. I think we all have a limited toolbox to manage the crowds. And that's what this is really about, is because there's a lack of, in a lot of ways, personal responsibility. And, then we have to create policy to make spaces safer for people. And so I guess my point is that from an enforcement perspective, I hear you. I think that we have to have a collaborative attitude with the businesses to get to success over the next 3 weeks. And if that means making some changes in how the streets are, and Malcolm, I hate to say it, but I might be reconsidering
Good.
the closing.
You can make the motion.
I couldn't I?
I mean, I'm serious. Like we've heard, well, we need some more data. So much time. Whenever you can't make a decision, people always say, I need more data, I need more data. And you keep getting more data, you get either you want or you don't want. Yeah. I mean, I think we should close the businesses. I think it would help the chief, it would help the island. So if you want to make that motion, we haven't adjourned.
Greg, I would rely on you to help me make.
Well, I can draft a motion, whatever.
That would be great.
Before we go back to that,
yeah,
the enforcement part. Christy, do you want to speak on what Melissa said, or Chief, before we go somewhere else?
It's interesting having two meetings. We almost have two things. It's going at the same time. So we'll go back to the selectmen meeting.
I was just going to comment on Chief's suggestion. I like what Melissa said. I think it's a time to think creatively, and if there's a way to close down Broad Street or the South Water Street extension, even if it's late at night, I think, we're sitting here saying it's on the businesses to, regulate, and then they're saying, okay, can you help us? They don't have the tools to expand their sidewalk space or expand their outdoor space to make sure people are 6 feet apart. So it's a little bit of give and take. We're asking them to do something and they're asking us for help. And, they're saying they're short-staffed. We're saying we're short-staffed. We got to find a way to meet in the middle to keep our community safe. And I think I just want to make sure we're thinking big picture. Is it just the Strip that's having issues until 2 a.m.? Are there other places around the island? Are we just focused on one or two? And as we said before, the state is harming everybody by thinking of one or two instead of thinking of the whole island.
I'll just respond. I think, around the island, you have just more space. This has become a space issue, and then, putting people in harm's way in multiple areas. So I think that's why this is the focus, because there's just very limited space for people on a normal day. So obviously around the island, generally most people have more space to distance and not be in the street.
We can take comment from the public. Mr. Greeter.
I believe I've successfully unmuted myself. Yes, thank you for taking my comments. I just wanted to first thank Melissa for rethinking the discussion on closing early. You're relying on your staff, both Board of Health and Public Safety, on recommendations on what to do for the safety of the public. And one of the reasons the public is here is because our numbers have been low and people have come here as an added reason to come here because of that. And so it's at a point now where the behavior of a few is going to start impacting the majority of folks. And the businesses need some help, but also I think the public officials need to listen to their paid, educated, task-specific staff that's giving them ideas or suggestions of what's needed to be done. And I would think I would rather err on the side of caution and listen to my public safety officials and my public health officials and follow their actions. Some of the business owners may not like it, but then again, the non-business owners aren't going to like it when the numbers go up or more drastic measures are had to have to be enforced. So I wish you luck with your deliberations, and I look forward to seeing what how it goes from here.
Thank you, Mr. Ritter. A select board, do we want to push this back over to the health department so they can figure their stuff out? Can we go forward and make a decision, Melissa?
Jason, would we need do they need a recommendation or consensus or a vote from us about street closures? What would be the next step to move forward with that?
I think if we wanted to close down some portion of Broad Street or South Beach Street, we would just ask staff to do that, whatever they feel is appropriate for the businesses and public safety and traffic, whatever chief and the fire department think that they could do in times. And we give a time limit, on Tuesday with this other order, we could do that to give some time, or we could implement it kind of on what does Amy and chief think. So there's two things, like what level do we want the police department to enforce, and if we're going to make some changes on the parking, what would we want to do? I think those are the two things that's on our plate. Matt?
I'll make a motion to let them work on, on making space on those streets as soon as possible. I mean, this weekend is going to be like last weekend. It's going to be one of the most, one of the busiest weekends of the year. So, but if we can't get it till Tuesday, that's fine too. But I think, if we can't put a couple sawhorses up and, that's fine. But I think, I'd leave it up to them to implement when possible. So that's my motion on that part of it.
I'll second that.
Excuse me, Matt, which streets are you referring to? So I can
the two that we've talked about.
South Beach Street Extension and Broad
Street Extension and Broad, where the chief was talking about taking some of the parking so there was more space for the crowd.
All right, I just wanted to clarify.
Those are the two that I mean, but if there's others, or they I'm saying let's do that, but leave it up to their direction, as Jason was saying.
Libby?
Okay, so you already said the other night to close off some spots on South Beach. So we heard that and we started doing it, and we hoped for Jersey barriers, but those are going to be too big. So Amy's already gotten the different thing in place with the sawhorses or the bike rack, not bike rack, but the whatever those things are called, the wire fencing kind of thing. So South Beach, I think, is already underway with trying to create space for lines over there. Lower Broad is a different story. I think we need some kind of specific direction on that. Are we talking Lower Broad? I don't know that you could really necessarily put the Jersey barrier, say, on half the road. I think you'd have to go from Easy to North Beach, South Beach intersection at least. I'm not even totally sure about that, but probably. And that is going to take a little time to get into place, but we can certainly do that as quickly as possible. There will probably be some immediate reaction from businesses down there.
Libby, Chief Amy, does it have to be Jersey barriers to block that up?
I think it does for safety reasons. Yeah. You got to remember, you've got intoxicated drivers that are driving that time of night as well. And I think if you've seen over in Hyannis what they've done with Main Street, I think it's very workable. It gives you a lot of space to work. And that road doesn't really need to be more than a lane width anyway at this point.
Just
right now.
Let's just also remember that is a truck route. So there's large trucks that come through there, and they're going to they need a little of their own space. But I think nothing but Jersey barriers is gonna be effective there.
Okay.
And
Can I just remind you all too that you voted to allow the overwide modular moves to go through there for Richmond, so they need to make enough space for them to go through starting in a week and a half, in a week.
So that may be something where they have to be. It's going to add some additional coordination. They may have to move a little on those particular days.
They go through the steamship lock.
So I guess we don't need to worry about those details right now. I think what we just want to know is, are we talking from Easy to the intersection of South Beach and North Beach?
That's where I was talking, was from the beginning Easy Street up to South Beach Extension.
Okay, so if the board is good with that, then I think we would like a vote on that, and we'll start implementing it as soon as possible.
Okay.
It may not be today, but.
Christy, then Matt.
And just for clarification, would this be all day or just at night?
I think it's going to have to be all day, because I don't think we're going to get equipment in there every single day to move them.
Right, which begs the question of, do we need to do it all the way to Easy, or do we stop? Do we corral from sort of the Indian Summer edge of Young's up to the South Beach Extension, and leave some spaces for the daytime from, sort of in front of Young's, in front of the other bike shop, into the corner? Is that enough space?
I'm not a traffic safety person. I would say I think it's going to be quite a cluster if it is not that section, but I could do it.
Okay, well, this question for Amy. Amy, it's pretty much Stubby's to the juice bar is where the majority of the line and gatherings is a problem.
Correct. Later at night, correct. But I mean, again, all day, people and the bikes and everything else, it is quite a congested area. And the daytime is just a different type of congestion. So if you're going to do the whole thing, I would think. But again, those are the businesses that rely on quick in and quick out people. So it's a tough thing to say all or nothing, but it's just different types of times, different types of congestion, different types of time.
Matt?
Yeah, and I think I don't think we can do the whole strip, the whole run of that. I think you can do a portion of it. I think if you if you look at how it's used by the bike shops and by the bike companies during the day, they people pull up, drop the bikes off. The bike company, people are. I just think I think we're opening a can of worms if we do that without consultation with them. And we say, well, we had no choice. We had to do it here for these two businesses.
Amy?
I'm going to say what's in my head is that, and we're waiting for this to be over to go get these crowd control barriers delivered to that area, is that obviously South Beach Extension is accessed by lots of businesses. There's lots of deliveries and things that go on behind those businesses. So it is something that really needs to be accessed at some point during the daytime. We can put those barriers around those parking spots and down along the juice bar there to assist in that time period. And then there's a certain point at night when it does get really busy that you can probably throw a crowd control barrier across the front of South Beach Street Extension. There probably does not need to be as much access at a later time at night. Further down on Broad Street, if we just adjust how it is in front of Stubby's there so people aren't going into the street, less things are open, people can go further down the street. So we may not have to pull that trigger just yet. Let's see this weekend. We're going to add some more space here, and the juice bars put stanchions out to define their line, which is very important. So we have a passing lane there too as well. So we're going to work on these two things and see how this goes. I don't think we need to pull that trigger right this second. That's just my opinion.
So, I think it makes sense because we were firing pretty fast here just to try to get through this meeting. And let's think about it. Let's maybe talk to someone. Let's go. I'll go down and walk. We'll look at it and then come back with something for next Wednesday and use this weekend to see how the smaller stanchions and police presence, how it if it affects anything. Does the board feel okay with that? But in the meantime, come back with maybe some recommendations for Wednesday, if we can sneak it on. Okay, I'm getting thumbs up. Christy, okay with that? Okay.
I think you can probably do it on Wednesday under one of the existing agenda items. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Amy, for bringing us back there. As an enforcement chief, do you want to know more from us?
I think we'll see how it goes this weekend. We're working on, that's why I've had a steady stream of people in here, working on trying to get the staffing rearranged for tonight and this weekend, and we'll see how it goes. Basically, we're going to focus more than just on Broad Street. We're going to try to divvy it up a little bit to down on, basically, as Matt suggested, I think it was down in the core area with the presence, and then if they're needed in one particular area, they can go there and deal with it. But hopefully what measures they put in place already with the lines will be effective.
Okay, thank you. Select board, are we okay with all of our stuff? Are we good, Libby?
I think so. Just to kind of recap a tad. So with regard to effective immediately, we're working on our South Beach closure, partial closure, figuring out that might be iterative process down there. We're going to have more public police presence in the area, and we're going to see how those things go over the weekend. We'll revisit this on Wednesday at the board meeting and determine whether or not we need to pull the trigger on all or part of Lower Broad.
Yep.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Melissa, I'm sorry I cut you off on Malcolm on the motion.
That's okay.
Christy, sorry, Christy, did I see your hand?
Sorry, just one last question, just maybe for Wednesday, Libby. I know that we're all trying to read through the latest governor's things, but to find out kind of how the police enforcement is expected by the governor and if maybe we'll be getting resources or funding, just to give an update to select board on Wednesday. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we can definitely do that. My very, very quick look over of it was that any assistance or funds would be going to the high-risk communities that were identified in the order. I doubt we're going to get anything at all, but it would be a good idea maybe to report back in about any other details that we might have missed in this thing right now. Maybe Greg Corbo, you can help us out with that a little bit.
Jason, are you going to take a vote on that?
What's that, Erica?
Are you guys going to take a vote on Matt's motion and Christie's second? Matt made a motion, Christie seconded it, and then it had a bunch of discussion and no vote.
I think we're off of that right now, but
I think I'm okay with what Amy said and what Libby went over. I think everybody kind of gave their thumbs up.
I'll withdraw the motion, Erica.
Thank you.
I think it's going to be taken care of.
Thank you, Erica. All right, Malcolm, really, really over to you now.
Okay. Thank you. So after some reflection, we seem to be moving back towards having a 12 o'clock closure for all businesses, including those that do not serve alcohol. So I think what we really need to do is the motion would just be that we are extending Order 13, Order 12.
Sorry, excuse me. Greg Corbo actually emailed a motion that somebody should probably read. Roberta, you have it in hand.
I don't have that.
Yes, I have it. It says...
I'll send it to the Board of Health right now.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll read it. So I move that the board vote to amend its July 30th, 2020 order relative to restaurant closures. So that now reads as follows. All restaurants that offer alcoholic beverages for on-premise consumption shall have last call by 11:30 p.m. and shall close and remove all customers by 12 midnight, and that all food restaurants and food service whether providing consumption of food on premises or takeout only, shall close and remove all customers by this time. It is further ordered that all such restaurants shall not serve alcoholic beverages to any person who does not also order food as defined by the governor's August 7th order and DPH guidance. Staff is directed to strictly enforce social distance and mask requirements, and the restaurants are required to require customers to comply with such requirements, and the board will revisit the issue at its next meeting in 1 week. The new provisions of this order shall take effect on whatever date you want.
Well, we're not necessarily meeting in a week. So we don't need that in that motion.
Okay, so we can say that when we meet on the...
You can say at your next meeting.
At our next meeting.
At our next meeting, which is the 20th.
Okay. Do I hear anyone to propose that motion?
So moved.
Second? I second the motion.
Excuse me, before you vote. Now, I listened to that whole thing. Does it boil down to the strip being shut down at 12 o'clock?
Yes, and any other establishment on the island at 12 o'clock.
Really?
Yes.
So we have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? By roll call, Jim Cooper?
No.
Melissa Murphy?
Aye.
Malcolm McNabb votes aye. The motion is carried 2-1. And it's effective. We don't have an effective date. Recommended effective date?
I would say Tuesday, Malcolm, with the governor's orders.
Yeah, I would too. That would make it, otherwise we'll get confused.
Yeah. And Malcolm, if I might just add a comment, you know, I think that we're seeing a resurgence of the virus in other communities. Hopefully it does not come back and reflect on Nantucket, but I think you heard the governor say today indefinitely delaying phase 2 or, you know, part 2 of phase 3. And there's epidemiologists who are recommending going back to phase 2, part 2. So I think that I make this recommendation and this vote with a lot of cognition that the virus is still very active outside of our community, that is a threat to our community. And we have a goal of making sure our year-round community is safe and that our children can go back to school in the fall. That balance to me is as important as the health of our businesses. So thank you.
Melissa, you say it all much better than I can. Thank you very much. You expressed my thoughts completely. All right. So Jason, the board, we're finished with our business. I don't know about yours.
Yeah, I think we're good, unless Libby, Erica needs anything, any other housekeeping? Motion.
You just both need to do your motions to adjourn.
Or motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor by roll call? Matt Fee?
Aye.
Melissa Murphy? Christy Ferentella? Melissa Murphy?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Aye. We are adjourned.
Board of Health, do I hear a motion for adjournment?
I'll make that motion.
Second. All in favor? James?
Yes.
Tim? Melissa?
Yes.
And I vote aye. We are adjourned until next time.
And
thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Meredith.
That's okay. I forgot I unmuted myself in anticipation.
That's my fault because you were cruised. I can't wait till we can actually have a meeting because I want to